Welcome, Maguses and Eaters. Maguses? Magi? Whatever it is, magic users. Welcome, Before They're Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is Steven, your favorite quadriplegic booktuber, and thank you for turning into another Phantology review. If you've been following the channel at all, you know that I'm attempting to reread all of Joe Abercrombie's first law books before The Wisdom of Crowds comes out in September. We'll see if I make it in time, but at least I'll be covering these first three in the First Law trilogy. If you want a more in-depth conversation with spoilers, Jake and I, who is reading them for the first time, will be reviewing them in detail in our podcast, so look up Phantology wherever you get your podcast from. So Before They Are Hanged is obviously the second in the First Law trilogy, and it is a tale of three different storylines. Three stories that you have heard before, at least on a surface level. So number one, we have a man who is trying to save a city that is besieged and has little hope left to it. Number two, we have a group of intrepid heroes off to find a magical artifact that will save the day. In number three, we have an army off in the frozen north against an enemy that they have sorely underestimated. They are undermanned and led by questionable authority, and one man will save the day. Or will he? So all of these tropes are somewhat familiar. You've seen them in other works, but none of it goes the way that you would expect. And that is the brilliance of Abercrombie. However, I am ashamed to admit that I did not fully understand this on my first read-through. I gave Before They Are Hanged a 4-star on Goodreads, which is like, okay, Goodreads reviews are always kind of, how many stars do you give a book out of 5? It's tough to do. But my Goodreads review revealed that I did not fully understand what was going on here. I said, quote, I enjoyed this one much more than book one and appreciated that the characters and world were fleshed out and got more exciting action and meaningful character growth that furthered the plot. What prevented this from being a 5-star? I felt frustrated by the nebulous nature of the central conflict. It would be nice to see the villain on screen, not just hear stories over and over. This leaves me confused as to the importance of a large portion of the book, other than assuming it's important because it's there and I'm reading it. So I do agree with some of what I said there. I would have appreciated more of a central conflict that is fleshed out and focused on throughout the story. However, I don't think I understood what Abercrombie was doing, subverting all of these tropes. And I don't want to say too much in this non-spoiler review, but just know going in that what you expect to happen is not going to happen, at least not in the way that you think it is. And that's kind of the point of the trilogy. So generally on my reread, I enjoyed it a lot more. And I think part of that was because I was more familiar with Abercrombie's writing and just more familiar with the characters in general. However, since I've most recently been reading the standalones in the Age of Madness, other than my read of The Blade itself a couple months ago, it's been some time since I've been able to spend time with the main characters from the first trilogy, so it was really fun to go back and see these guys again and remember exactly who they were at this time. It's also fun to go back and appreciate all the foreshadowing that happens here, and on a reread, this really shines. So there's some things that happen much later in the series that obviously you don't pick up on until reading that, and then you go back and you realize that Abercrombie is setting up so much of these recurring type of ways that he just handles events, that then the cyclical nature of everything, down to the way that he writes and describes things, is just perfect. It adds to this entire feel that Abercrombie creates. His prose and the way that events happen really adds to the great art of the story, of the First Law universe. So one thought that came as I was rereading this was, is there enough character growth at this point in the series where 2 books into a trilogy have the characters progressed? And some characters, yes, absolutely they have. Other characters, they have, but then they haven't really. And that's kind of the point a little bit, and I think that's what Abercrombie's commenting on a bit with human nature. But it is a little unsatisfying to see that some characters really don't make a ton of progress, And I think that could be improved. I think that is one criticism possibly of the series. I'll say Logan, yes. Glokta, yes. He gets better at the things that we know that he's already about, but his growth, questionable. Jazal, kinda. You'll see once you read the book. Pharaoh, yes, definitely, but also like only the reader knows. None of the other characters realize that she's growing. Dogman, yes, definitely. West, yes. And I think Column West is the character at this point in the series who's had the single most growth, which is interesting because he's one of our minor points of view characters, not one of the three major ones that's really focused on. So the characters are amazing. You've heard me gush about this in other reviews. I also I just mentioned this, but I love the prose, and I love how darkly funny it is. I feel like some readers may not get this if you don't have the right sense of humor, but I do. This is my exact type of humor, so I love that Abercrombie does this. I feel like the entire time he's just laughing at himself, not taking this too seriously. And if I could ever interview Joe, this is the thing that I would ask him about the most. Just how do you write? How do you craft this prose so it's so perfectly funny, but also every character just could step right off of the page, has their own voice to them. Yet it's also quite simple writing. There's no real complexity. There's no real deep complexity here, but every character sounds so different. Just how does he do it? How is Joe such a secret genius here? I feel like some readers don't get this because the first law does not appeal to everyone. But man, if you are someone who it does appeal to, you really like it. This is a series that people really get into for good reason, because for whatever reason there's a niche of the human audience that really latches on to this type of thing, and Joe does it perfectly. So there's a lot of action, more action than in the Blade itself. And there's also a lot of violence, more violence than there is in the Blade itself. But I don't think either one, while they are gratuitous when it's happening, which is also kind of the point of, it's part of the reason why it's labeled grimdark, like it or not. But it's definitely not too much. The quantity is not too much. And this really appeals to me because I like the chapters where we can just sit around the campfire and talk to our characters and get to know them and hear about the scars that they've accumulated and the stories that they tell. I really enjoy those character moments, and Abercrombie obviously does those things brilliantly. I just read The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, which was a good book, but I wasn't quite as high on it as a lot of other reviewers, and one of the reasons why was almost every chapter featured a ton of action, which is exciting, which is fun, which is cinematic. However, I didn't think there was enough time in that book to really just sit around and get to know the characters, because you're always moving at a breakneck pace. There's a lot of other books that are like this as well. Red Rising, The Burning by Evan Winter, the Valen Al Sorna books by Anthony Ryan. There's a lot of action throughout those books, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes I like the slower moments too. And Abercrombie really perfectly balances the let's gear up and have something happen that's really exciting for a while, and then let's just kind of sit around and enjoy and get to know people and deal with the ramifications of what they've done and what's happened to them, rather than just immediately move on to the next thing. I think that's crucial at least for my preference. Okay, ratings, setting, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I love the First Law universe, but it's nothing too fancy. There's nothing too super unique about it, which is fine. 8 out of 10 is a pretty solid rating. We get a lot more lore in this book. And another criticism I have of the trilogy, as much as I love it, is I feel like the lore is a little bit info dumpy, and I still don't, after finishing the book and after even reviewing the book in order to compile this video, I can't tell you exactly the relationship between Eos and Juvens and Gustrat and all these other magi. I know if I look at the Wikia, it is clearly defined and it's defined in the text. However, I just think there's so many details to it, and it's not a real big part of the story that I just struggle remembering that. and I feel like if I'm struggling to remember it, it could have been a little bit stronger. That said, I really enjoyed the expansion of the world, moving into different realms, hearing about more things, and the universe is exciting. It's fun to see this. It's fun to see this in other books as well in universe, so 8 out of 10 for setting. Characters gets the elusive 10 out of 10 rating. I love the characters, absolutely love them. They're amazing, real people. I'm convinced they are real people somewhere out there that gets up right off the page. I could talk with them. These guys are amazing characters. Abercrombie, bar none, I think the best working author writing characters. Pacing, I'm going to go 9 out of 10. Not quite perfect, but I really enjoyed the ebb and flow of the fast action and then the slower moments. I thought it was very well done. Prose also earns a 9 out of 10. Again, not perfect. There's some things that could have been a bit better, but really solid prose. I really enjoy the way Abercrombie writes. Plot is unfortunately only a 7 out of 10. This is my main criticism of the book. I just wish there was more of a centralized plot. I'm sticking with my initial criticism from Goodreads, although I like it quite a bit more than my first read. I just struggle with the fact that we hear a lot about the main conflict, but it's just like, how important is this main thing anyway? And I understand that is kind of the point of the entire trilogy, but at the same time, I still don't know if it sits well for me because I'm so used to hearing about, this is how most stories are structured, right? And so to have this that completely defies all the tropes, well, I love that it does that. At the same time, it's like, could there at least be something that seems like it's a little more centralized? And I don't want to spoil too much more for the rest of the trilogy. There is that. It does exist. However, at this point up in the story, through 2 books, you're still like, okay, what exactly is the problem here? Also with the plot, it's like fairly straightforward. There's no big, like mind-blowing, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened and this was hinted at throughout. Like there are some surprises, don't get me wrong. However, could it have been a little more exciting in that way? The Sanderson way, where it's like, oh, I can't believe that he did that, and it all makes sense now. There wasn't that. He didn't try, Abercrombie doesn't try to. Could there have been? Could it have made it a bit better? Absolutely. I believe that it could have been. However, I think it's a little unfair to say like every single thing that I like about a book needs to be all contained in one book. 7 out of 10 is a decent rating, but plot could be a little better. Okay, final rating of 8.5 out of 10. One of the higher ratings, and a higher rating than I initially gave before they were hanged. I don't remember what it was, but if I gave it a 4 stars on Goodreads, it's probably more like a 7 or 7.5 out of 10. Goodreads stars out of 5 don't really translate. You can't just double the number. So, up a solid 1 to 1.5 points from my initial read. And I guess on to Last Argument of Kings, which was the Abercrombie book that got me hooked on the series initially. Through the first 2 books, I was like, this is pretty good, but I wasn't loving it. Last Argument of Kings, I loved the first time through, so I'm going to be pretty interested to see how I like it the next time. Thanks for watching, and I hope your life is better than most of the characters in the first Law books. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Phantology. If you'd like to let us know your opinions on all things sci-fi and fantasy, join our Discord. Invites are in the episode descriptions below. If you'd like to support the show, like these fine folks here, you can do that at patreon.com/phantology_books. Patrons get early access to new episodes, exclusive postings, and exclusive Discord benefits. But of course, just listening and watching and sharing with your friends and family is support enough. Journey before destination all.